Hello, and welcome to Its Continuing Mission, where another Star Trek devotee spends too long talking about the ongoing impact that Star Trek has on the world and the people in it, or at the very least, on themselves. I'm Ollie, your host and captain on this exciting voyage, and today we are discussing When Captains Are Wrong. When you explore a wide open galaxy, you invariably encounter challenges, dangers, and conflicts. It requires frequent and rapid decision making to keep your ship, your crew, and sometimes the entire galaxy safe. But you can't just make a decision, you have to make the right decision. Every single time. Otherwise, the universe explodes or something. Also, it's usually important for both resolving the plot of an episode and delivering a moral or ethical message if the episode calls for it. As Garrett Wang once said in a panel, Star Trek is one of the only shows with a message. Star Trek is silly and fun a lot of the time, but even then, its setting is its purpose. It shows us an accepting, just, and post-scarcity world where TOS's enemies become TNG's lieutenants, where peaceful exploration is the primary mission of the military group's flagship. By showing us that utopia, it promises to us that this world is possible. It can't show us how to get there, but it does show us, over and over again, the kind of decisions that make the continuation of that world possible. That's why our captains are pretty much moral paragons. For the most part, we can trust them to right wrongs and correct injustices. Because if Star Trek is our vision for tomorrow, then captains are our role models for today. We can't get rid of money and disease overnight, but we can make decisions like our captains do. By doing so, we bring that utopia closer to us. But sometimes our captains get it spectacularly wrong, but we can learn from that too. Let's start with Janeway. She leads one of the most controversial episodes of Star Trek ever, or at least one of the most debated, as it was generally well received. I speak, of course, of Season 2, Episode 24, Tuvix. In this episode, a transporter incident combines Tuvok and Neelix and some alien flowers into a single individual who has both of their memories and personalities, but who nonetheless is a distinct new existence who calls himself Tuvix. Though the crew struggle to accept him at first, he lives aboard Voyager for about 2 weeks, creating a full life and being quite successful and cool. But then, the Doctor creates a procedure which can reverse the effects of the incident and restore Tuvok and Neelix. But Tuvix is against the procedure. It would essentially be killing him. Janeway proceeds with it anyway, performing the procedure herself when the Doctor refuses on ethical grounds. While the Doctor is the only crew member to come to Tuvix's defense, the rest of the family is somewhat shaken by the outcome. Audiences were as well. Janeway's decision was inevitable from the very beginning. After all, this is a TV show. We can't replace 2 main characters in an episodic series just like that. We have contracts to consider. Nonetheless, her choice goes against all of the values and principles outlined by the Federation, which can be summarized by respect all life. Tuvok and Neelix effectively died in the transporter, and Tuvix was born, thus receiving all the rights that a self-supporting sapient life form enjoys. Janeway, as Tuvix's captain, a role she took on by allowing him to fill the tactical officer position, had a duty to protect him. Tuvix begged for his life. Janeway took it away. She murdered him. As Deanna Troi learned during her command training, leaders can order subordinates to sacrifice themselves. Usually, these orders are to save other people, and usually those subordinates consent to the order. But this wasn't the case with Tuvix. His death didn't prevent a greater tragedy. The ship still had an excellent tactical officer. It didn't save anyone, not even Tuvok and Neelix, who were already gone. This wasn't a trolley problem. Tuvix died to relieve Janeway's grief for her friend. That's it. It was a selfish, emotional decision. Janeway abused her authority and violated Federation principles to kill an individual for her own comfort and faced no consequences. It was the wrong choice. So what do we gain from that? Well, Janeway's decision was incredibly human. If I could bring back someone I loved, I might consider an extreme choice like hers. But by watching her do it, I've already experienced the discomfort and disgust that comes with following through on those impulses. That means I can make my decision now, before I'm ever faced with a challenging choice and overwhelming emotions. That's a valuable part of any story. We need to see fictional choices that we don't like, so we know not to make them ourselves in real life. Yeah, I'm probably not going to be in a situation where I can bring back a dead friend by sacrificing someone else, but there certainly are situations where we need to prioritize the people who are alive over the people who are already dead or indeed not yet born. We can even go a little broader, a little less life or death. Is forgiving student loans fair for all the people who suffered and worked for years to pay theirs off? Is legalizing drugs fair for all the people who spent years in prison? No, it's not fair. It sucks that Tuvok and Neelix died, but that doesn't mean Tuvix has to suffer too. So watch Janeway leave sickbay, swallow down her regret, and ignore her conscience. And promise yourself you won't do the same. We learn a similar lesson in an Enterprise episode we discussed in the last podcast episode, Season 2, Episode 22, Cogenitor. Please listen to the queer episode of this podcast for the full summary. In this episode, the moral dilemma our captain faces is whether or not to grant the Cogenitor asylum after Charles requested it. Charles was enlightened on the Enterprise, realized that Cogenitors are not treated fairly, and rightly asked to leave the situation. Archer argues that he cannot grant asylum because he has no right to arbitrate or interfere with the lifestyle or culture of another species or society, especially one that he is unfamiliar with. He's told that it's easy to misunderstand someone when you know nothing about their culture. And he agrees enough to ignore someone asking for protection, and T'Pol tells him that's the right thing to do. He didn't have decades of Federation principles and directives to guide him, but we don't need those to know that Archer and T'Pol were wrong. He sided with the person he was getting along with and refused the person asking for help. Trip, the person who recognized injustice and did something about it, is the only one who's punished, which leads to the scripted morals of the episode: to weigh the possible repercussions of your actions and to keep your nose out of other people's business. Those aren't bad morals, but they're not the right ones for this story. What we should have learned is that oppression is not culture. There is no possible society where sapient people can be justly oppressed. It's wrong, no matter who does it, no matter whom it's done to, and no matter where it takes place. In fact, the twist that cogenitors are mentally equal to their oppressors was unnecessary. It would be wrong even if they weren't capable of learning to read. Compare the cogenitor situation to that of Tosk in DS9 Season 1, Episode 6, Captive Pursuit. Here, the first life form from the Gamma Quadrant comes through the wormhole, acting sus but needing repairs. He calls himself Tosk. O'Brien quickly befriends him and gets to work on fixing the ship. However, they have to arrest Tosk when he tries to steal weapons. Then more visitors arrive with weapons of their own. The intruders find Tosk captured alive, and they are disgusted. It turns out that Tosk is a person essentially bred to be an interesting quarry in a recreational hunt, meant to die with honor after a good chase. Because he was captured alive, Tosk failed, and the hunters plan to take him home to be mocked for the rest of his natural life. The Federation crew are appalled by this practice, but they can't do anything without violating the Prime Directive, especially because Tosk didn't ask for help. He wants to fulfill his purpose. He wants to die by the hunt. O'Brien doesn't accept this. He schemes, lies, and crimes to help Tosk escape, so that at the very least, he won't live out his final days humiliated in a cage. He does not interfere with another culture to do this. He doesn't force his views of equality or discomfort with killing games onto Tosk. He simply recognizes an injustice and takes action to improve it. Miles is reprimanded, but it's just for the sake of deniability. After all, behind the scenes, Sisko instructed Odo to take his time apprehending the escapees, which gave them the time they needed to get out. This situation is different from the cogenitors in a few ways. Primarily, Tosk was encouraged to request asylum but didn't do it. His beliefs were not changed during his time with the Federation like Charles's were. But even without asking, even with Federation consequences hanging over them, the crew of DS9 still did the right thing. The crew of the Enterprise did not, even though they were asked, and even though they didn't have a Prime Directive to violate. I said earlier that the scripted moral of cogenitor is to weigh the consequences of your actions, especially when that involves other cultures. Miles O'Brien and Sisko both did that, and they got a happy ending. Trip did weigh the consequences of his actions. He was ready to take responsibility for Charles. It was Archer who failed. He didn't weigh the consequences of letting Charles return to a society that oppresses cogenitors. He thought about future relations with that society as a whole, and he thought about his new friend. Then he blamed Trip for a death that was caused by his willingness to ignore injustice. Archer got it wrong. But like Janeway, he doesn't face consequences. The narrative doesn't even acknowledge his own portion of the blame. Sometimes the writers get it wrong too. But the viewers can still get it right. Be angry at Archer, and be angry at all the other powerful people who allow oppression to continue unchallenged and who villainize the people fighting for equality, no matter who it is, no matter where it is. I have one more story of captains getting it wrong. Captain Eric Pressman of the USS Pegasus, though in the episode we're referencing, TNG Season 7, Episode 12, he was an admiral. The mistake didn't happen in this episode, it happened long in the past, when Riker was a young officer serving on his first ship, the Pegasus. Captain Pressman and the crew were testing a prototype cloaking device. Pressman endangered the crew with experiments and the crew mutinied against him. Riker, fresh out of the academy, defended his captain along with a few others. They engaged in a firefight while fleeing toward escape pods, and soon after they departed, the Pegasus apparently exploded, killing all of the mutineers. Pressman got it wrong as a captain, and continues to get it wrong as an admiral. He believes that endangering and even sacrificing his crew is fine for him, because he's doing something special. Some real Raskolnikov level thinking, and we've known what happens after crime since 1866. Pressman does ultimately get the punishment he deserves. So now, let's turn our focus to Riker. He wasn't a captain, but he got it wrong too. He defended someone who was harming others and ultimately had a hand in the deaths of his crewmates, but he regretted it. Here's the crucial part. Regret didn't right his wrongs, but it did guide his actions. He learned from his mistake, and when he was faced with a similar situation, he made a different choice, one that he didn't have to regret, because it was the right one. His service after this incident was exemplary. He began to prioritize safety over protocol, and from that moment on, his duty to the chain of command didn't get in the way of his duty to himself and the people around him. That doesn't make the lives lost worth it, but it makes a wrong choice stomachable. That's the hope that Star Trek leaves us. We're going to get it wrong sometimes, just like even our captains get it wrong sometimes. But if we can admit it, if we can look that wrong in the eye, we can use our regret to strengthen our principles and make the right choice next time. And the gift of complex language and extreme empathy is that humans have the unique ability to learn from other people's mistakes. So admit when your captains are wrong too, even if they don't face consequences, even if the narrative itself tries to blame someone else. You know right and wrong. Choose right whenever you can, even if Cisco yells at you afterward. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Its Continuing Mission. I hope you'll come back to explore more of the familiar old world of Star Trek with me soon. I'd like to issue a correction to episode 4 of this podcast. At the end of that episode, I endeavored to list all of the award wins and nominations for achievements in makeup. I failed to mention that the DS9 episode Captive Pursuit won an Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Makeup for a Series. There may be other awards that I missed, and feel free to tell me if there are, but there will be no further corrections on this matter.